Special guest is Mr. Grant Cameron, ufologist, and noted ufologist, and who has now moved into the realm of consciousness. And we're excited to have him here today. I'm a huge fan. I've learned a lot from him over the years, and so excited to have you here today, Mr. Cameron. And
Well,
Well,
thanks,
welcome
Tom, for
aboard.
having me on.
Welcome
Beautiful. Thank
aboard.
you.
thank you, Mr. Cameron. Really
Thank
happy
you,
to be
Nori.
with you.
Beautiful. And Augie, thank you. As was wonderful. We've had one discussion already, and hopefully today we can sort of bring some maybe enlightenment to some other people.
Oh,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
I love that word.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful.
let's start. I've been listening to, there's so many YouTubes out there. I was listening to some of your disclosure YouTube. So you are a legend in ufology, and you are now expanding the consciousness arena. So can, just for people who don't know you, can you just give us like a cursory information about the ufology? Because I am new to it.
Sure. Okay. Basically, it starts for me in May of 1975. As I have mentioned, I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, which is about 60 miles from the Canadian-U.S. border above North Dakota. It's noted as used to be the coldest major city in the world. But what happened is 1975, in February of 1975, a small town called Carmen, Manitoba, started having almost daily sightings of an object that they called Charlie Red Star. And it was a red plasma type object that was flying around. It was seen quite often. And I was young, going to university at the time. And what we used to do is we used to drive around the city and do nothing. And so I had no interest in UFOs that I can think of, or extraterrestrials. I never thought about extraterrestrial life. Didn't really interest me. But I was into weird stuff. I had done a paper at university, a full-term paper on dying patients in hospitals, all the weird stuff that happens around dying patients. You know, can they predict their death? Are there any miracles? Does anybody have people come to visit them before they die? Does near-death experiences had just basically started? The first near-death experience book had been written at that time. So I was into that weird stuff, but I wasn't into UFOs. And so when these sightings started in February, I said to my friend, I said, instead of driving around the city, why don't we go out and see what everybody's looking at? And he said, yeah, we'll do it. And we never did. We didn't go out until May of 1975. A local TV station captured this thing on the ground, and they caught it as it was jumping off the ground. And it became like a viral video. And at that point, I said to my friend, I said, come on, let's go see what they're looking at. So we drive to this town, not knowing what we're going to see or what to look for or where to look or anything. We drive in the town, out of the town, around the town. We're driving around for an entire hour, and we're looking at stars and planets and whatever we're looking at. I'm not even sure what we're looking at. And I'm basically saying, we're all saying, is that what they're looking at? Is, you know, we'd see certain things, and we couldn't figure out, like, what's everybody looking at? There doesn't seem to be anything unusual here. My friend says to me, he's driving. He said, okay, we'll drive back into Carmen one more time. If we don't see anything, let's go home. And I said, okay, fantastic. This has been a total waste of time. So we turned the car to go back in. We're about a mile west of the town. We turned to go back in, and it appears from the left to the right. And I say it appeared because it was not a light in the sky. It was an object. It was in pretty close. And nobody at that point, I always tell this rule that people, if you have not seen anything, you can either believe or disbelieve. Only the people who see it actually can know. And so we were going, you know, is that it? Is that it? At the point when this thing appeared, coming from the left, going to the right, nobody in the car said, is that what they're looking at? I wonder if that's, everybody just went, there it is. Everybody just instantly knew. This is what they were talking about. It was very, very low to the ground. It was bobbing up and down. It was red. It was a plasma, almost like a heart, like it was alive. It was slowly pulsing. And it came right in front of the car. And I was just floored. I mean, I was getting out of the car. The car was still moving because it was going in behind a set of school buses that had been parked outside this town. And I knew it was going to get down low. I couldn't see it behind the school buses. And I wanted to get through the ditch and across the parking lot to the school buses so I could continue to watch this thing fly off. And it was just like it was not doing anything. It was just flying into nowhere. And so we watched this thing. 2 nights later, I took all my friends out. And an hour later, they all said, we're going back to Winnipeg. We're hungry. This is a waste of time. And they all took off. And about 15 minutes later, it came directly at us the second night. And it was very low. It was jumping around the sky to start with. And when it got in very close to us, that's the first time I ever thought of extraterrestrial life. I was thinking to myself, it made a turn and it started to go off into the northeast. And I was thinking to myself, wow. I could actually be someone from another planet. I was just like floored. And I'm going, why is nobody investigating this? Because as I said, it started in February.
Yeah.
So
And it
I
was
went and
May.
interviewed everybody. And what happened was that I did a manuscript. Nobody would publish the manuscript. And the local publisher from Winnipeg, where I'm from, it's a big city, said, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers. And I went, what? I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that she said this. And it led me on this search to find out not people's sightings. So I really didn't care about sightings anymore. I don't care what people see or what they say. Because again, it's just a story that it's meaningful to them, but it's not to anybody else. So all I wanted to know was somebody must know what that thing was that I saw. There's got to be someone in the world knows. And I started this trail where I went to the Canadian government, learned what they had, as much as I could about what they had discovered, went to former president of Penn State University, who had 14 honorary doctorate degrees. He knew what was going on, bugged him for 8 years. Then he led us to the president of the United States. And then I started to study the president of the United States because I figured, well, he's the most powerful guy. He's got to know what's going on. And I did that thing. And then in 2012, it all changed for me. I was watching Colin Andrews, who invented the term crop circles. I was watching him give a lecture in Phoenix, Arizona. And I disassociated, which is the key word. It's the magic word. I disassociated. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't want to be in the room. I was thinking about going across to the other side. And I had what I refer to like a download experience, where instantaneously in my head, it took 3 pieces of the puzzle that I had over all these years that had discovered this stuff, and it put the 3 pieces of the puzzle together. And suddenly it was like, oh, that's how it works. And then I started this thing of consciousness. And since then, I am very happy as to what's happened. It's like I can now read the street signs. It's a totally different world. And I basically say that consciousness is the basis of this thing. And unless you understand that consciousness is key to this whole thing, you will never, ever understand the UFO phenomenon.
Wow. Wow. Tell me again, where were you when you dissociated?
This was in Phoenix, Arizona. This was at this big, it used to be a lot longer. It was UFO Congress. But this was in the days in like 2012. It was a lot longer. So what happens is you have these events that start at 8 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, and you don't go to everything. So, you know, the odd lecture, you'll say, I'm not really interested in this guy. And I wasn't interested in crop circles. The only reason I went in the room was because Colin Andrews is a big name in ufology. And I go, I've never seen him lecture. I should, pay him respect. I should go watch his lecture. But I had no interest in crop circles. And that was the key. If I'd been interested, I would have been paying attention. But I wasn't paying attention. I was just sort of zoning out, and I was just thinking about other things. And that's when it happened.
So this is so interesting to me. When I want to ask you about the plasma too. I'm just saying that so I don't forget. When you say you disassociated, what do you mean? Because I'm like, as a nurse, I'm going to the psychology definition of disassociating. Can you help me to understand what that was like for you?
Okay, what I say, I wrote a book called Inspired, The Paranormal World of Creativity, where I look at savants, I look at artistic people, I look at people who got instantaneous books like J.K. Rowling's, all the books of Harry Potter, all came instantaneously to her when she was waking up from a nap going into London, England, on a train coming from Manchester. The Wizard of Oz was an instantaneous download. It came to him while he's reading his kids' nighttime story. And so it's this kind of thing where I say what the key to the whole thing is that it's the ability to shut down the ego mind, that we are stuck in this world where we think we are here, we are independent, we are separate from the rest of the universe, and it's this ego mind that is there. And when you can disassociate now, and I'm giving a lecture next month in Los Angeles, and I'm going to go through this whole what I call contact modalities. And I say there's about 40 contact modalities and they're all the same thing. They're all disassociating. So you can use hypnosis, psychedelics, brain injury, drumming, music, pain. There's so many different ways. And what it does is it shuts down the ego mind, and it allows you to pop into the field, because it's all one thing. There's no separation, but it's all one field. But you get up into the field where the spirits live, the aliens live, where all these people are. And once you can dissociate, you can get into that world. Almost like there's a famous channeler out of the called Bashar out of Los Angeles.
Yes.
And he does this thing where he says, we come to you in your dreams, because you'll always hear people who've had experiencers, and they'll say, No, I don't think I was abducted. They come to me in my dreams. And you hear this all the time where people say, I don't know if I was really taken, but I have these weird dreams. They're in my dreams and stuff. And Bashar says, we come to you in your dreams because now you're in our world. And that's what it's all about. There's this other world there that, because almost like who was Huxley wrote this book about perception many years ago, the LSD stuff. And what he had, it was like a filter, and that you have this filter in the brain creates this filter that separates all the forms of consciousness, so that if you the filter was open, you'd be totally inundated with information and stuff like that. And this filter allows you to stay in the physical world. And with LSD and with all these dissociation techniques, what you do is you rip the filter and you pop into there, and then you can come back through. But it's this filter that blocks all this kind of stuff. People think it's a different world. No, it's the same world. It's just that you are in a world where your ego conscious mind is blocking vast majority of what is reality.
Amazing. Amazing. And I want to come back to this because there's so many places we can go with this, but I'm just curious about the plasma. So, like, as a nurse, I'm thinking about plasma, how it's kind of gelatinous.
Yeah.
Is that what that appeared like for you?
Yeah. The way we always referred to it, we called it a dead light. And this is before orbs, before people talked about orbs, because we saw these things later in 76 on the ground. And I got close enough to one that I was going to jump on it. I was within 50 feet. It was a small object, which was like a plasma type object as well, but it was like an orb. So the way people describe orbs, or if you hear people talking, they're inside the craft, they'll talk about this dead light. So when people start talking about the light inside the craft, I go, I've seen that before. I know exactly what you're talking about. And the only way I can describe it is if you take a light and put it inside a bag, like a paper bag or something, and the light that's coming off, it can be very, very intense, but it doesn't light anything up. Because I remember the night, this is April of 1976, we were at a bridge where this object was about 50 feet away from me. And I'm looking at this thing, and it was along the railing of a bridge. There was it was like a drainage bridge, and these wooden railings. And I remember it was like an inch from the edge of this railing. And it was so intensely bright, you could barely even look at it. And yet the light that was coming off it, just barely, it was like an orange glow on the side of the bridge. And to this day, I can still see it. And I'm thinking, why is it not lighting up the bridge? It should light up the entire countryside. And it wasn't lighting anything up. It was very, very intensely bright. So that's the only way I can describe it is you couldn't see the shape of it looked like it was longer than it was high. So you could say it was a saucer. I can't really tell if it was a saucer, but it was so intensely bright that you couldn't see the edge of the craft. It was like a ball of plasma. That's the only way I can sort of describe it. That looked like it was alive. That was the other thing, is just it looked alive. It was like it was this weird pulsing thing that later on people would describe, like when I deal mostly with experiencers, because that's what you got to deal with. You got to deal with people who are dealing with the phenomena. You can't have sightings, really doesn't matter. It's the people who are interacting with the intelligence, and they will describe this fact that I have 50 people who've flown the craft, and they'll all say the same thing. They'll say, the craft was alive. I interacted with the craft. I become one with the craft, and the craft did whatever I thought. My mind took over the craft, but I was one with the craft. And that, when I heard them say the craft was alive, I even had a guy the other night I interviewed, and when he said that, I said, okay, so how do you know that? You're in the craft. Explain to me, how do you know the thing's alive? And because everybody will describe this. If you talk to people who've been inside the craft, they'll describe this thing. And that's what the first impression I got when I saw it then. It wasn't like it was like no object I've ever seen before, and no object that I've ever seen even comes close to what I saw. It was just so weird. That's when I said, when we saw it, everybody went, there it is, because it was just so weird. The color, the sort of the glowing, the pulsing, it was just so weird. It didn't look like anything that you could even think of. So it's very hard to describe it, except to say it was red, it was longer than it was high, it was moving up and down, plasma is about the closest I can say. Very bright red plasma.
Interesting.
Have you given some thought to why this happened?
Oh yeah, but not till 35 years later. You mean about the randomness of it? Absolutely. I mean,
the plasma. Mm-hmm.
Well, but the randomness was more important. I mean, the plasma thing, like they appear, and so I have a theory called the theory of wow, and I talk about the theory of wow, where I say they're not really doing anything. They just want you to go, wow, that's all they're doing is they're raising consciousness. And so I say it's maybe like on another planet where what they're doing is they just say, well, we got these natives. Now they've detonated an atomic bomb. They're destroying the environment, and we got to go and get a message through to these people. And we can't go in there like we go into Iraq and tell them, we're here to bring you freedom, democracy, Jesus, and McDonald's. They come in and they want you to get an idea so that you come up with the idea. And so they're trying to give a message. So it may be like I say, it's like a science fair project. So the grade 1 class, you say, okay, we got to get this message to these natives. What do you want to do? And the little grade 1 kids say, okay, our science fair project, what we're going to do is we're going to put lights on crafts. We're going to fly them around, and people will see these things. And then you see, because no crafts are the same. They all look different. Everybody sees them. And I described like John Lennon, the famous John Lennon story, August of 1974. John Lennon sees a UFO with May Pang, who was his girlfriend at the time. They're standing there, they're naked up on the top of this penthouse in New York. This thing is close enough, John Lennon said, he can hit with a brick. And it's got these white, big marquee light bulbs going bloop, 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 on the side of it, going off and on, and a red light on the top. And I say, do you think you really need big marquee red white light bulbs to fly through outer space? Because you see, everybody's got a different description of what it looked like, and it was like, oh, let's show them this, let's show them that. And if you start looking at the phenomena, you see this weird stuff. There are really no two UFOs that really look the same. When you start looking at gray aliens, you look at the gray aliens, you go, that's not the same. They're all drawing sort of different gray aliens. They have this archetype, and they start drawing it. Or the crop circles. All crop circles are different. So that's like maybe the grade 3 class is putting down crop circles. Say, let's put these down. Everybody goes, oh my God, what is that? I wonder how they did that. And people start to think, and nobody ever solves a thing. Or ground traces. When I started in the 1970s, ground traces were the biggest thing going. It was like, oh, we've got physical evidence. These things landed. They impressed on the ground. They left these tripod marks. They burned the soil. They put this type of metal into the soil, all this kind of stuff. There has not been a ground trace for 20 years. It was big in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and then it stopped. And so the whole idea is maybe that's what they're doing. They're just trying to get our attention. And that's why they shut down nuclear missiles. That's why they appear. That's why they come to people. And they don't give you, because the intelligence, whatever the intelligence is exactly like the government. It's got 3 options. It's not disclosing. Because if it wanted to disclose, it would land on the White House lawn and tell us all what's going on. They're not disclosing, the beings or whoever they are. But they're not covering up. Because if they were to cover up, they would turn off the lights. They wouldn't be flying over John Lennon with these light bulbs going on. They want you, if you see a UFO, you're part of the game. Right. They want you to see it. That's why they put lights on crafts. And so they're not disclosing, they're not covering up. So what they're doing is something in between. And the government's doing the same thing. So it's this breadcrumb thing where you see a crop circle and you go, wow, that's pretty cool. Or even if you're following the latest thing with the metals, if you're following this whole thing about to the stars and these metals, and people are all excited. It's like, oh, we got these metals and we're going to learn how UFOs fly, and we're going to, hit it with terahertz energy, and it's going to levitate, and we're going to, make lots of money, and we're going to go to the stars and stuff. And it's like, if you see the pieces, there's probably 40 pieces. And I even had one when I was in Tucson. We discovered one in a file at James McDonald's files in Tucson. He was a big researcher in the 1960s and early 70s. And he was a professor there. And his files, we found a file of an object that came out of the sky in 1939 in Illinois. And it looks like a golf tee with a ball on the end with these bumps on the ball. And it was made out of 99% nickel. It came flying out of the sky. It landed in the garden, dug itself into the garden like a spike. And it was red hot. The guy couldn't touch it. And so when it cooled down, he pulled it out with a knife and he put it in his house, and he didn't know what to do with this thing. And then his daughter comes along and he gives it to her, and she happens to live in Tucson. And he says, well, I don't know what to do with this thing. You can keep this thing. And he tells her the story. It came flying out of the sky one day in 1939. And NASA is built in 1967. They were going to the moon. So in Tucson, they had a lab there. So this woman had this weird spike thing that came flying out of the sky. And so she went to the NASA lab, and she said, oh, you guys are doing space. Maybe you can figure out what this thing is. So they do this analysis. They determine it's 99% nickel, which nobody was making anything out of 99% nickel in 1967. And that's where it ended. So he has this weird thing with this analysis. And now we have all these pieces, but none of them look like they come off a craft. There's like little balls of metal. You even have these stories, and it happens over and over again. In fact, the first UFO sighting ever was not Kenneth Arnold. It was 3 days before Kenneth Arnold. It was Maury Island in Washington, where the UFO is flying along. There's 5 UFOs, and then suddenly the one UFO looks like it's going to crash, and suddenly it explodes, and all these metal comes flying down. It actually kills a dog in one of the boats, and if somebody gets a broken arm with this metal that's falling down, they grab up all this metal, and then the U.S. Air Force comes in. They grab some and they fly it off, and they crash the plane, which starts the first big UFO conspiracy story. But they have this metal, and this happens over and over and over again. There's lots of these stories. UFOs flying over, it makes this noise. It looks like it's going to crash. It shoots out this metal. The people go pick up the metal. It's the same thing as a crop circle. It's the same thing as the lights on the thing. It's like, oh, let's give them this, and we're going to change the isotopes. We're going to make it out of 99% metal, because no two pieces are the same. And if you look at the pieces of metal, none of them look like they come off a craft. It's basically what I call the theory of wow. They're just trying to get our attention.
Now, Grant, I got a question for you. You mentioned earlier that that they're doing all these things with the lights and whatnot. We were talking about downloads earlier. Now, Aage has had a download. I've had a download. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've had other downloads as well. And so I get that. So do you think that, I mean, it just seems logical that the downloads are also part of this same kind of wow moment that...
Or raising of consciousness. They're sort of helping us. But then you have to look at the other factor that when you look at secular science, because there's some people out there who are doing papers on actually getting to the point of why do experiencers have these things. But when it gets to any sort of thing that looks sort of religious, it's like, oh no, I'm not going there. It's like, it's like, I'm not listening. They've got their hands over their ears.
Right.
But if you look at experiencers, and there's the free survey, which has 6,000 experiencers, and if you take a look at them, and you see 25% of them say they were talked to by the aliens about reincarnation. 76% believe that reincarnation is part of this thing. So when you get these, and I've talked to Mary Rodwell about this, and I've talked to Barbara Lamb about this, and especially Mary Rodwell asked her, I said, Mary, if you regress all these people all the way back, and you say, at any point in the past, did you agree to be in this situation? I said, what percentage of the people would say yes? She said 100%. It's the whole idea. This is not a random event. This is that you actually chose, and you start to see, if you start looking at the data, you start seeing, and I've got a bunch of people that I've interviewed. One guy's name is Steve Boucher. The Moody Blues is a prime example. The Moody Blues all of them were abducted in 1967, going from Manchester into London. And the Moody Blues contacted Colin Andrews. Colin Andrews was contacted by 5 bands. And the Moody Blues, which sold 50 million albums, they're no small, garage band. They came to Colin and they said, we want to talk to you after your lecture. And so Colin says, I go to this lecture, and Mike Pinder, the head of the Moody Blues, and the lead guitarist is there. And they're going back and forth, and they're telling him this story. They said, we remember before we were born. We were sitting at this table with these elders, and they told us, you're going to be musicians. You're going to go into the world, and you're going to put lyrics into songs. You're going to raise the consciousness of the world. And then the lead guitarist says, oh, tell them about coming back in. Tell them about the black hole. Tell them how we came back into the earth. And they tell this whole bizarre story about this reincarnation thing that they knew. And I've got piles of people where you start talking to them and they say, I remember picking my parents. I remember coming in here. I knew this was going to happen. And that's why when you start seeing these bizarre statistics if you look at the free survey stuff, you see these bizarre statistics that 37% of all people who claim that they've had an interaction with a non-human intelligence also say they've had a near-death experience. And I remember that somebody wanted to have a panel. They said, we got to form a committee. We got to figure out why this is. And I said, you don't need a committee. This is very simple. Why this is happening. You're assuming it's a random event. You're assuming, oh, I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when this UFO flew by. It's not a random event. You chose this experience. If reincarnation is a fact, then you chose to come here at this time to be a part of the UFO thing. And if you have a near-death experience, you chose that too. There's nothing random. And that's what people assume is it's all random. And when you start looking at reincarnation and you start looking at pre-birth stuff, people remembering coming into the earth, especially experiencers, will say quite often that, or a lot of people will say, I'm not from here. And you get a lot of musicians. Patti Smith, the woman that sang Gloria, first woman to sing on Saturday Night Live, she said, I'm not from here. She just firmly believes she's from somewhere else. John Denver, sold 54 million albums. John Denver believed he came from a part of the constellation Lyra. He actually writes a song. I can't remember the name of the song was, but it was released after he died about this belief that he had about this constellation. So you have to look at it not as random events, as nuts and bolts. Once you start looking at the fact that there's multiple lives and it's not random, it's almost like people sort of believe in this random thing. And I had a download experience. You mentioned yours. I had the big one in 2012, but I had one that was way more complex about a year and a half ago, and it was 24 items that came. And there I was walking. I do a lot of walking where I can disassociate. I just walk. And I can disassociate, and suddenly stuff starts coming in my head. And what happened was it started coming in my head, and there was 24 items. And basically what those items were look at the world. You got that all backwards. For example, you're assuming, is the world made of nuts and bolts? If it's made of nuts and bolts, then it's one world. But if it's a world made of consciousness, everything changes. Everything. You got to rethink everything. And it's the idea, like an equation. If you add instead of subtracting in step number one, you can do all the adding, subtracting you want. You are going to get the wrong answer. You have to do it in step. Or the random. If you believe it's a random world, then it's one world. But if it's a self-organizing universe, it's a completely different world. So you have to make the proper assumptions. And that's the problem we have, is that secular science has built this world that's random, it's meaningless, everything is just background noise, stuff like that. And because of those belief systems, we are making a lot of mistakes in terms of what's happening. And I think that's the downloads they're trying to tell us. Right. Most of the downloads, they're not to tell you, this is how anti-gravity works, this is how to, drive your car for free. It's all this sort of thing about what is reality. They're telling you these stories about how does it work? How does the universe work? They're trying to get us correct on the basic reality rather than trying to give us some more toys. We got enough toys. Most people think this is about toys, about getting free energy and stuff. And it's not. It's about this whole thing of understanding how the universe actually works.
It's almost like they show up and they tell us, we get fascinated by the toys and by the gadgets, and they're like, oh yeah, we got that too, but that's not why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. And that's you can sort of assume it, because we are a Western civilization where it's rape, pillage, kill, and steal. Whoever's got the most toys when they die wins. It's a competition worldview. So it's like we're trying to get more stuff. We got the 2 cars, we got the house. Now we need some entertainment. So we're going to go to a UFO conference. We need someone to entertain us, to tell us. And that's not what it's about. It's about understanding the number one message. I say the number one message that the non-human intelligence is giving us is one that came in this download. And that was a third one, which is it one or is it separate? If everything is separate, if we are separate objects in time and space, then that's one world. But if everything is connected, as you would see in quantum physics, these ideas that we are all one, or Absolutely. People who have the download experience, like Edgar Mitchell, who had the oneness download experience, or people in the ayahuasca experience, they suddenly realize everything's alive, everything's conscious, this sort of thing. As long as we believe that there is separation in the world, we're going to destroy the world. Because I say, you cannot have, as soon as you have separation, that is the beginning of evil. You cannot have evil if you have oneness. If you suddenly realize that you are part, almost like Deepak Chopra says, if you realize that the breath that you're breathing, the air that you're breathing is your breath. If you realize the trees that are around are your lungs. If you realize that the water and the oceans are your circulation. If you realize all this stuff, your connection to the oneness, then you start living the right way. But we believe it's me versus you. It's competition. It's capitalism. And therefore we get into this thing where there's evil aliens and we're going to shoot these buggers down, and you're a bad guy and this guy's a bad guy, and we're going to build walls. And you get into this separation thing. And the more separation you have, the more chance there is that we will destroy the world, because the world is one, and we have to realize that. And that's the message they're trying to get to us.
Totally agree. Absolutely.
So, Mr. Grant, I just wanted to go back for a minute to the wow factor.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the different ways that they come to people. Do you think that those ways are intentional, based on the person's capacity to perceive it?
Yeah. Yes. There was actually an experiencer. He's a A-level Hollywood guy who had an experience. His mother's one of the most famous people in the world, but he came to me and he said he was Ephes was the alien that he was dealing with. And he told me something that just rang a bell as soon as he said it. He said, Ephes told me that when we come to interact with somebody, we will basically, and this is this manifestation thing,
Yes.
we come to you, and if you are into a world of fear, we will use fear to teach you a lesson. We have no choice. We can only use what's in your head to teach you a lesson. So if you're in a place of love, this comes to this idea. Why do some people see grays? Why do some people see angelic beings? Why do people, and it's the old idea that you are manifesting what you're seeing. Even John Mack at the end of his life started to understand this thing. There was a big debate that you can see on the internet between him and Bud Hopkins. And Bud Hopkins says, you know, John, he says, he's very peculiar. How is it I get all the bad ones and you get all the good ones?
Mm-hmm.
And then Max says, you know, he's so cool. He goes, well, Bud, perhaps that has more to do with you and I than it does with the aliens. And that's the whole thing, is that you start, or you people have people start, they have sort of a very physical experience to start with. And as they grow and as they get into the the experience, it becomes less and less fearful. And suddenly they start seeing angels and they start seeing all this kind of stuff. And it becomes much more spiritual. And people, again, people sort of stick it in that it is solid. It is a physical object when in fact you're manifesting the whole thing. We've got to realize that you are part of the equation. It's not a separate entity coming to you. You are part of the whole process that's going on.
So in 1974 was my experience, and I've not talked to anybody about it, but during that time I had, for whatever reason, gotten into meditation.
Yep.
I was young. I was in my teens. Meditation. I was eating vegan, which was very unpopular back then. And I was very grounded in the balance of love. And the experience that I had was, it was a love like I have never even imagined existed. And it was that love that taught me at an early age that we are one.
Yeah. And that's common with other experiences. Like what I do in mine is I don't just look at UFOs. I look at, like when I did the Inspired, I look at all the different things. So when you start looking at near-death experiences, people will say the same thing. I have never experienced love. You can't even describe the love I experienced. And you see these parallels. So it's the same thing. Like a near-death experience is the same thing. It's just a different, almost like a different mask.
Absolutely.
Phenomenon is wearing a different mask. It comes to you in a different way based upon your lifestyle. And a lot of times the near-death experience will wake up. You'll hear this thing that I had talking to a woman last night, because I'm looking, I'll maybe get into this thing. I'm looking for a particular type of person. I want to run an experiment on DNA, but she was one, and then she wasn't able to completely dissociate, which was what I wanted. But she started telling me this thing. She had this Kundalini experience, and she started to open up. And then she said, and then I had this near-death experience in 1988. And then I said, so is that when all experiences really sort of started? And she said, yeah. It's like it opened her up. And once you get opened up, then you're in that world, and they can come through. It's like you've ripped the filter, and in they come. They sort of come in there. And so, yeah, there's a lot of these parallels, especially the love thing. Like 54% of all experiencers are talked to in their experience about oneness and love. And that's not something you would really sort of make up. It's like, why would you have this? But if you have your experience in 1974, or you hear these near-death experience things about this key importance of love in this whole thing, it doesn't make any sense. But once you've had the experience, you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's why this is part of the equation. And you would say, no, it's about metal. It's about free energy. And it's like, no, it's about this other stuff.
Right. So so family, science, government, religion, they all taught us to be separate.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Not a sweeping generality, pretty much. So a lot of people are looking for like these magical transcendent ways to become conscious, to open, the filter so they can feel the oneness. And I'm wondering, isn't it in your everyday life? It's not like at a big retreat. It could be like in your everyday life when you just let go of the ego, and that one person that annoys the bejesus out of you, you let it go and you meet them at a new level.
Yeah.
I mean,
but it's hard for people to do that because people are into the world. And I empathize with people because, like if you have an experience, usually your other half is not into it. Your kids are not into it. All your friends aren't really into it. You may have one or two. And so I empathize with these people that when you're in this world where you got to pay the bills and you got to take the kid to soccer practice, you get swept up in this world, and it's pretty hard to break out of it. And I say, that's why I always say, I try to thank God, the universe, whatever,
Yeah.
almost like Deepak Chopra 3 times a day, and say, thank you, thank you, thank you. Because I got to play in this game. I say, if you understand what's going on with what this story is, this is the Super Bowl of all stories. And you and I got to play in the game. We're inside the stadium. Most people have no idea there's even a game going on. So to me, it's like, it's a great honor. And so I empathize with the people who really don't understand, because if I hadn't had the download experience in 2012, if I hadn't had the UFO experience, it might have. But if I didn't have the download experience, I would be exactly where those people are. It was the experience that changed me. It was like flipping a light switch on. It was just bizarre. And so I can empathize with those people. But then you have the other problem is that when you understand, when you've had the experiences you and I have had, then you have, I'm a big fan of Dr. Michael Newton, the life between life stuff. Mm-hmm. And Newton talks about the fact there's 7,000 people that he regressed. And they all say that when you die, you go in front of a council. It's between 3 and 12 people, and they're wearing these medals and all this other stuff. And they only ask you one question: how did it work out? Because you planned it. You did the whole thing. And I always remind people, because we live in this world where we believe that we are happy and sad based upon what's happening around us, because we believe in separation. We believe I'm separate from this person and that person. And I always say, when you get there, I can absolutely guarantee you are not going to be able to bring up Hillary Clinton in emails. You are not going to be able to bring up the dog ate my homework. You are not going to bring up your mother-in-law. You're not going to bring up anything. It's about you. It's about me. And so when you realize this, when you realize that you've been allowed to play in the Super Bowl of all games, you have to realize to whom much is given, much is expected. That's what the Bible says. Edgar Cayce, who I was really into when this thing started in 1975, Edgar Cayce said, knowledge not used is sin. And there's this parable in the Bible about the talents, that if you've got a talent, you're expected to do something with this. So you can't say, I would have done something. I screwed up life, whatever. But Hillary in the emails, no, anything with her.
I just couldn't get over that. Yeah, I couldn't get over that.
Is they keep thinking that I'm sad. The reason that things are going bad is because what other people are doing, and it really doesn't matter. I say, you and I, whatever our situation is, and we've got a pretty good situation being in this story. We went into a casino, we sat at a 21 table, and we're playing blackjack, and we're being dealt cards, and it's good cards, bad cards, we're being dealt it. And quit whining about the dealer. You can't change the dealer's cards. You have to play the cards that are being dealt to you.
Exactly.
Love it. That's awesome.
And do you think that, because you were talking a bit about manifesting before, and about the why do I get the good aliens and you get the bad? Why do I get the bad ones? You get the good ones. Do you believe that our intention and the way that we choose to see things, or the way that we choose not to react to things, helps us to become more conscious?
Okay, give me that again.
Do you think that the way that if we shift our perspective and try to, for me, I tell people to drop into your heart space, because if you're in your heart space, your ego goes. So if you choose to live from your heart space, if you choose to move away from the ego, do you think that advances your consciousness or opens the filter?
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is to get the idea across to people that for you and I, we can understand dropping into our heart space, but you talk to them and you can see their eyes rolling back, and it's like are you crazy?
Can I buy that at Walmart? Wait, what?
That's where experience comes in. I'm actually doing a lecture at Consciousness Life Expo in LA next month. I'm going to do this whole thing, and one of the contact modalities is pain. It's head injury. It's this kind of stuff. And this may be why the aliens, I was talking to this guy, I was doing an interview with him last night about the screen. 39% of all people that are on board the ship see this screen. And they show them these images of, catastrophic, nuclear war, floods, people dying, all this sort of stuff. And almost everybody says the same thing. And I said, was the screen on the wall? And he said, no, it wasn't really on the wall. It was like a 3D screen. It was like a hologram screen. It was just sort of there. Right. And I said, what do you think this is about? And everybody says the same thing. They said, I think they're testing my emotion. I think they're testing how I react. But this may be disassociation. This may be the fact that when you're scared, You dissociate, and that's what they want. They want you to dissociate. That's why they come as an alien and grab you out of bed. I mean, it's like a real horrific type thing, and that may be intentional. So people look at in separation, they say, I want the good ones. Deal me the good cards, not the bad cards. Right. And when you start to realize how the world works, you realize that it is the trauma, it is the pain that actually teaches you. As long as things are going great, you say, oh, I'm so smart. I got this figured out. I'm so cool. And you're not learning anything.
No.
And people don't realize that. So you have to see things in a reincarnation world, that things are events. And so when something happens to you, whether it's a good event or a bad event, you have to say, why would I choose this? Exactly. And if you take personal responsibility for what happens to you, you can take anything. You can take a good event. It's like people will say, there's aliens and, people commit suicide and stuff. I say, yes, this is true. You have people who go through grade 12. And some people think it's the greatest event in their world. And some people think it was so bad that they got to commit suicide. It's the same event. It's how you react to the event. Everybody's experiencing these events. And it's like almost, the other expression I use is, if you are, say, a Jew in World War II, and you realize that the Nazis are putting people into gas chambers in concentration camps, and you say, I got to stay clear, and you're trying to hide, and all of a sudden the door knocks, and there's 2 SS guys standing at the door. What are you going to do? Right. You just keep living. That's what you got to do. You've got to react to what's happening. It doesn't matter if it's a bad card, a good card. It's how you deal with what happens to you, not what cards are being dealt to you. People are always trying to change the cards that are being dealt.
Exactly. Or the way that we're taught to react to those bad things.
Yeah.
Like many of us are taught to react to death in a certain way.
Sure.
And later you could find out that you feel differently, when somebody that you love dies and you don't react the way that your family told you to react.
Yeah. I'll give you another example. A lot of people will bring up, for example, the United States situation with politics. It's so divided. It's so, and people, when you get into the UFO thing, people will start bringing up politics or whatever. And they'll say, oh, this is a terrible time. And, this is the world's at the end or whatever. And I always say, hang on. You chose to be here at this time and this place. As bad as it was, you chose to be here. Yeah. So you got something to do. It really doesn't matter. Maybe you've got something to solve. So people are always looking at this thing and reacting to outside situations instead of internally being motivated. And once you're internally motivated, it's like I even say to the thing, and people sometimes get a little upset. I say, you know what? It really doesn't matter even if we destroy the world. Because if we do, you're coming back anyway. You're going to go to another planet. You are going to keep coming back until you get it right. Exactly. It doesn't matter. It's like, so people think, if the world is going good, then I'm going to be good. But if the world's going to be destroyed, well, I'm just going to go out and have a party. I'm not going to even pay attention anymore. And you have to realize it doesn't really matter what's happening to you. It's how you react to what's happening.
Right. Because we signed up. We signed up for this.
Yeah. You chose to be here at this time and this place. So quit complaining.
What's funny is that once you get that perspective, a friend of mine and I were saying, he'll be back. We're talking about somebody that was losing it. He'll be back.
Yeah.
He'll be back.
Yeah, there was even the joke in the UFO community where people say, "This UFO thing, it's garbage. I'm quitting. I'm retiring. I'm quitting, whatever." And we always had this expression, even in the '80s, you go, "Don't worry, he'll be back. Nobody."
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back on your plasma craft experience in Canada in the early 1970s.
Yeah.
I'm getting a suspicion here that particular experience was for your purpose because nobody else in there had done anything with it. I think it was there to wake you up.
Absolutely. But I didn't realize that. As I said, it's a part of growing. I didn't realize that till 35 years later. I went back to do a lecture about it, and that's when I suddenly realized. Because here's what happened. This part of the story I haven't told you. We saw the object. We didn't want to go, and it was 3 months until we went. And because this TV studio called CTV in Winnipeg got this thing, I never would have gone if they had not taken that film of this thing jumping off the ground. And it's like 35 years later, I'm going, I wonder if they allowed themselves to get caught. I've never heard the story of a UFO being caught on the ground by a TV crew and being filmed as it jumped off the ground. I'm going, maybe that was because I would never have gone. I never would have gone. And here's the key. So when they went out, what happened was they had these crews. The government network is the CBC. Then the CTV is the private. So they were all out there trying to get film because this thing was there all the time. So CTV went out there the one night and they almost got it. It was on the ground. They thought they were going to get it, and they couldn't get any film. So they go back to the TV studio, and they say to the assistant news producer, they say, "We almost got it. We're going back out again tomorrow night. We almost got it on film." And the guy said, "This is garbage. Nobody's going out. You idiots, you want to chase stupid flying saucers? You can go on your own time." So these guys were so down the rabbit hole that they said, okay. So they all went out on their own time. And it created a real scandal once they got this film, because NBC picked it up. It was a viral film, went around the world, and they hadn't paid these guys. They all went out on their own time, and they had no cameraman. So they took a guy who was a film editor from the film editing room. He'd never used one of in the 70s, giant, huge cameras that they took out, these big TV cameras. And he had never worked a camera before in his life. So they take him out, he's running. And what happened was the object was on the ground. They could see it was glowing up, it was glowing down. And we have these mile roads. So every mile there's a road. So they sent somebody on the North Mile Road and South Mile Road, and they came around, and the one on the north side came across, and there was about 8.25 miles, because it was on the ground. It left these sort of radiation patches. So we know exactly where it was. We know exactly where the camera was. And so they looked in this thing. It was like they said it was like a fly. It was like it looked clear like a flying saucer. It looked like a movie screen. It was sitting blood red, standing on an angle like a movie screen, but it wasn't touching the ground. It was hovering above the ground behind these trees. And so they looked around to see where they were, and then they looked back and the thing was gone. They went, "Oh, it disappeared." But it actually jumped at that moment. It had jumped above them, 5,000 feet above them. Meanwhile, the guy got the TV camera at the other end of the road. And here's the thing that shows you. And suddenly I realized this wasn't random. The guy's at the end of the road, and he's looking through this TV viewfinder, and he sees this thing glows up, glows back down, glows up, glows back down, and he goes, "They didn't get anything last night. I got to get something on film. The next time this thing glows up, I'm going to shoot." And it's almost like the UFO said, "Are you ready to shoot?" It's because it glows up. He pushes the trigger, and the thing jumps 5,000 feet in the air as he pushes the trigger. And it was not until 35 years later I'm going, that wasn't random. They wanted me out there. I wouldn't go because we were busy doing other stuff. I wasn't really interested in UFOs. And they said, "We got to get them out. Let's do something really bizarre." And that's why I went out. And once I saw it, like the rest of my friends, they went on with their life. I still have the guy who was driving the car. I still have coffee with him every Saturday morning.
Wow.
And he went on with his life. Didn't affect him. It was like me. I was like, oh, it just jumped off the edge of the earth. It was like totally changed my life. And lots of times we'll be in a meeting or a coffee session where somebody will come up and they'll talk. They know I'm into UFOs, and then they'll say, "Oh yeah, how did it start?" And I go, "Oh yeah, well Larry and I were out. We were out the one night and we saw the thing." And then they'll go to Larry, go, "You were there?" He goes, "Yeah, I was there." "You were there? I didn't know you were there with him when this happened." And then he said, "Yeah, I was there." "So what did you see?" "Whatever Grant said, that's what we saw." So it does affect people differently, and that's where you get this idea. If you study Michael Newton and read Michael Newton's books that he did on this life between life, you'll see this thing where before you're born, according to Michael Newton, you go into this big 3D amphitheater, and it's all 3D, and you get to see your upcoming life, and you see people like you. And I sometimes tell people, like, you and I intended to have this lecture. We decided before we were born, we're going to do this lecture. We're going to raise consciousness. You're going to call me. I'm going to do a lecture or whatever. I'm going to do an interview. And so people are sitting there watching, and this woman's got a brooch. And as soon as you see the woman with the silver brooch, you know you got to meet up with her because that's one of the people. And you're going through, and Newton would be saying, "Okay, tell me this." And the guy would go, "Shut up. I'm trying to watch. This is important. I need to know what I'm going to be doing." And that's the whole thing, that all these events, you think they're random. You think, and when you start to look at them and say, "I probably planned this. Why did I plan this? What does this mean?" Then you start having the synchronicities in your life where you get on the right path. And that's what I think synchronicity is. It shows that you're on the right path.
Mm-hmm. I love synchronicities.
Yep.
Totally agree with that.
Much of what we do is pre-planned.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
not
when
the
you
smaller
realize
things.
that,
Yeah.
you it's significant when you start running into people, because Newton does talk about, people, getting ready for a plane crash or a sinking of a boat or something. There's 100 people there, and they're all planning they're going to be on this boat that's how they're going to all die. And you see that kind of stuff, then you realize that we all may have come here, and we all planned that we said we want to play the Super Bowl. And so when I do a lecture, especially to experiencers, people who have actually had the experience, when I do a lecture, I see highly spiritual involved people. I see, like, if you see the different levels, like there's the white and then the yellow and then sort of a reddish color, then a blue, and then purple is the highest level. When I see them, I'm thinking, like, this is all gonna be blue or purple people. These are people who are here, who have chosen to come here at this time in this place for this very, very important lesson. to the world, that we're playing this role. And when you see it like that, then you start to sort of pay attention. Should I do more? Should I do this? And you start to see it in the right focus, rather than being distracted by the ego, by the mind, by the toys, by all this kind of stuff.
Do you see also that the lack of disclosure? I've kind of wondered this, and maybe you can confirm or deny this. Maybe I'm full of it, but maybe if they gave us too much information, we'd mess up the timelines they're trying to work through to get us along the way.
You're talking about the intelligence?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, the way I look at it is, again, you have to look at it as the universe is eternal. This may have been the 1,000th planet they've done this on. This is not the first rodeo for these guys. They know exactly what they're doing, because you see what they're doing is, how can you get, like, intelligence would love to have this kind of stuff. How can you actually get people to buy in to this whole thing, where they're actually down the rabbit hole, they ain't getting out, they believe this kind of stuff. And if you go into, or, we go into Iraq, and we're in there, bring you freedom, democracy, Jesus, McDonald's. And next thing you know, they're pointing guns at us, and you're inside a restricted area. And the only time you come out when you're in an armored personnel carrier. And so they know exactly how to shift the sort of the people's thoughts, but they have these people. That's why I think we're important, that they have these people like you and I that are their intermediaries, or we may actually be them. And that's what John Alexander actually said. He said at one point, what if it's true that they are us and we are them? And so you get this idea. People will give me the thing about the evil alien. Oh, they're evil reptilians. And I go, okay, they're evil. What happens if you come back as a reptilian next time? Are you then evil for the rest of the eternity? It's like nuts. I mean, there are no evil aliens. There are no evil people. There are no good people. There's just souls reincarnating. Everybody does good and bad. Some people may do more good, more bad, whatever, but we're all just souls. And so we get into this problem of we do the separation thing. There's good people and bad people. And then when the good people that we think are good are doing bad things, we defend them and we make excuses for them. And in fact, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Everybody's working through this sort of reincarnation thing. And even if you get the bad stuff, if you get into Newton, you really get into the really weird stuff, where if people will say, okay, you killed somebody in this life, the next life, you're going to get killed. Well, as Newton, some of the reincarnation people will say, somebody has to volunteer to do that. And it's this idea that maybe it's just a big play. Maybe we're all in this thing, and there really is no sort of world that we think, good, bad, heaven, hell, this sort of stuff. Maybe it's all just a thing where the universe is experiencing itself, and we're running through these things. But it still comes down to the key thing is the responsibility, to take personal responsibility for where you are, what you've got. And if you think this is important, we've got to change this, then maybe it's your job to do that. Maybe that's why you're here. And don't worry about anybody else doing it. Don't assign it. Don't delegate it. And then once you get that and you realize you have a purpose in life and you've got something to do, then all the fear goes away. You realize you're in this time, this place. You don't live in the past. You don't live in the future. You live right now. Who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? And that's what I say is you don't need to worry about anything except I came into this world to do something. I'm going to leave and they're going to ask me one question. How did it work out? All I've got to do is figure out, why did I come into the world and what am I supposed to be doing? The rest is irrelevant.
Yeah. Do you think the suffering that we cause for ourselves is when we are saying no to the path that we actually came to take?
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure. You're fighting against the stream of sort of knowledge, and yet in a way the pain still. I mean, it's comes down to what are you learning. So even if you have pain, if you're having a bad position, bad time, that may be a learning experience. That's where we sort of get thrown off, as we sort of see handicapped people, or like I work at a homeless shelter. I volunteered at Ronald McDonald stuff, and people always get these ideas, like these people, they're homeless and they're bad people, they're lazy, they're whatever, and it's like, no, they're just ordinary people, and that they're as happy as anybody else, and that you learn from whatever you have, and that sometimes I used to work at the University of Manitoba. I used to have a lot of the cleaning staff and the maintenance people and the ice makers and stuff like that. And I'd run all these buildings, and I used to go in. It was very bizarre, where it's the way you see the world. it was a very highly unionized environment. These people made a lot of money. They had 5 weeks holidays the first year. It was unbelievable life that they had, and working Monday to Friday, this kind of stuff. And I would go to them and I'd say, how's it going? They'd say, oh, my area's too big. You gave me too much. This person, when's it bucking off? I got to do this, guys. And it's, so go on and on and on. And then I go to the homeless shelter, and I've done this. I've been there for maybe 12 years, something like that. And I do it on purpose. Like when sometimes get to hand out the plates. So there's a big line, and they're coming through and I do it to everyone, and I do it on purpose. Like, how's it going? How's your day? One time in 12 years, someone said, lousy, I'm terrible. And the guy was sick. I thought he was going to fall over. There's something wrong with him. But everybody goes, oh, fantastic. Oh, great. How are you? Fantastic. Yeah. And it's like, I couldn't believe it. And even when I go back to university, I try to stay away from my staff in the various buildings I used to run, because I know they're going to go, man, you better get back here. This place is just garbage, man. It's just... And it's the attitude. It's the attitude you bring. So sometimes we see that like I almost say that the poor people in the world, the afflicted people, are the people who are learning the most. That when you're in our environment, you have to watch out that you're going to get swept up in learning nothing, because there's really no challenge. It's those things that happen to you that really, it's almost like they say in the reincarnation world, the biggest lineup is for the handicapped people. There's a big lineup for everybody to get into the handicap line, where it's people are looking for suffering. They're looking for this kind of thing. And whereas we're trying to avoid suffering and get the good stuff. And I say, if you get away with that you just get good stuff, I don't really think you learn that much.
Right. And and it's so contrary to, I mean, what we're taught in America, but if we can surrender to the suffering, it's so much easier.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you take it as your friend. You
Yes.
Even if you look back at the events that happened to you in your life and the things that went bad, it's not the end. It's like you can say, are you still breathing? There's almost this expression that as long as you're breathing, there's more going good with you than bad with you, no matter what is going bad with you. Right. And it's that attitude where you look back and you go, that wasn't so bad. I didn't die. I mean, I learned something from that. Even I worked for a guy, it was, I usually don't talk about it, but I worked for a guy, it was like Donald Trump. I mean, he was like a psychopath. And it's one of the reasons why I had to leave. It was like, and I said, until you actually been around somebody like this. And then I look back on it and I go, I actually learned a lot from this guy. And so you see the world a different way when you start looking at the sort of the things that you really made you angry, really made you bad. It's almost like the idea of soulmates. Your soulmate is not the person you get along best with. It's the person that really gets under your skin.
Exactly.
That's your soulmate.
That's right.
That's the person that's going to bring you, or people will challenge you in interviews with questions. And it's the real tough questions when people start attacking you. That's when I go later and I'm really upset. It's like, oh man, I can't believe they asked that question. And then later on I'm thinking, and it's suddenly an idea will pop into my head. What's the answer? And I'll go, oh, I'm glad that guy asked that question.
That was a good question.
I was
right?
upset at the time, but that's where you learn stuff, is that challenges. And that's maybe the way the universe works, is it gives you the good, it gives you the bad. And it's this balancing of learning. It's all about learning. It's about the world replicating itself, self-organizing, and it's good and bad, almost like death. So people say, I want good. I don't want death. Death is bad. And I say, well, you really think death is bad? Because if you take a look at the human body, you and I are just like cells in a human body. You have your job to do. I have my job to do. You just do your job. You don't have any ego. As soon as you got ego and say, I'm no longer going to die, I'm just going to continue to multiply, that's called cancer. You're a cancer cell. The thing is, and say, do you really want all the cells in your body not to die, to keep living? And you realize that in the human body, every second in the human body, 3 million cells die. And they're doing what they're supposed to do. And so you say, is that bad? And if you realize it's part of the process and that life never ends, it's just we get overcome by fear, uncertainty, and we allow that to dominate our life. And so the more that you and I can educate people in terms of how does it actually work, the more people will move from the fear to the love. Because there is only love and fear. And almost like Bashar said, there is only light. There is no darkness. Darkness is not a thing unto itself. Darkness is just the absence of light. The same as fear. There's only love. The absence of love is fear. The farther you get away from love, the more fearful you become. There is no such thing as fear. There's just love. And if you start to understand how it works and move in that direction, then things start to sort of make sense. Plus you help more people rather than, it's not what I get for myself. It's about, what am I supposed to be doing? I came into the world to do something. And when you're in the other world, according to the Newton thing, you have absolute knowledge. You know exactly how it works. So you make these agreements with your soul guides to come in to do certain things. You have the absolute knowledge, and we forget. We go through the river of forgetfulness. We come into the world, and we suddenly realize, oh, I'm separate. These things are objects. I can use animals. I can kill animals. They don't have souls. I can destroy the world. It's just a thing. We forget the separation, and we go that route. But if you can remember where you came from and what you're supposed to be doing, everything will work out well. But you have to understand where you came from and how does the world actually work. That's why I was so enlightened by this download, where it basically gave me 24 things. This is how the world works. You're making this mistake. You think it's nuts and bolts. It's consciousness. You think it's one life. It's multiple lives. You think it's random. It's actually self-organizing. And these kind of things where I feel just enlightened, and I can't talk enough to people because I figure like, almost like Edgar Casey said, knowledge not used is sin. That if I've got this information, when it goes on the other side, I can't make any excuses. They go,
How'd it go?
this idiot didn't know. They get a break. You don't get no break. You knew what was going on. And that's where you and I are in a worse position than anybody else, because we're not going to get a break. You knew what was going on, and you still didn't do anything.
Yeah, you're held to a higher standard.
Yeah, exactly.
Before you were talking about darkness and light, and there was a time in my life where I was afraid of everything. So I took this wilderness kind of class, and I learned that in order to see in the dark, you look into the darkest spot.
Wow.
And that carried over into my spiritual evolution.
Wow.
But I was thinking, thank you. I was thinking about the filter and the flip, right?
Yeah.
Do you think you can open the filter to experience heaven?
You can open the filter. This is what this technique is about, where I talk about the 40 modalities. Like, you have some very dramatic ones where you have the ayahuasca experience. And I remember the one that is the funniest. If you got to look it up if you've never seen it. The one with Sting, the musician Sting, where he talks about his ayahuasca experience, and he's this famous musician that goes there. And then the shaman says, "Which one is Sting?" And he goes, "That would be me." And then he says, "Oh, we got special one for you." Mm-hmm. And they make him drink this huge one. And he said he's just devastated. I mean, he was begging the guy to like kill him, get me out of here. It's like he's like, help me. And the guy's hitting with these leaves and stuff. And then he describes the enlightenment. But you have this almost like when the woman comes in the ayahuasca experience, and people say, like Sting says, if you think this is a recreational drug, think again. This is a horrific experience. Like it's going to clear out all the crap inside of you. And so that's where it comes down, is this idea that we are in a world where we're trying to get there, and there are different modalities to get it, and some are better than others. But you still have to realize that there are modalities, and to do it, so you have, like hypnosis and all this kind of stuff, where you can sort of get there. But when you get into the ayahuasca and that kind of stuff, I think that's about but it's an uncontrolled experience. Exactly. Where you ain't in control. Once you take that, it's game over. Yeah, right. You can't pull out, you can't back out or whatever. Or some of the experiences that they do with
LSD is like that.
LSD, or the one they do at psilocybin. If you've ever seen, there's a research is done at Johns Hopkins University where they do it with dying patients and stuff like that. Where if you've got 6 months to live, and they said all sorts of people are trying to get into the thing because they wanted to do this thing with real, like pure psilocybin in a controlled environment where you've got doctors around you and all this kind of stuff. And in those experiences where you have this, what they call a mystical experience, the oneness experience, where you have, you can't explain it, you realize everything's one, and there's 6 elements of this mystical experience. I think that would be the heaven thing. But again, these people will talk about the fact that when you're there, you're bringing your world into it. So it's important where they talk about the fact, there's this Mary Kuzminiuk, I think her name is, the one that works in the room. She's in there, and they have 2 people in the room, and this experience lasts about 6 hours. And they have the people in the room, and they have 2, because if someone has to go to the bathroom, there has to be someone, because at one point during the experience, you're going to go down the negative, the fear. Right. It may be 30 seconds, it may be 5 minutes. And what they do, and this is this idea that works the same as lucid dreaming, if you've ever seen it, where once the person starts to go down and the fearful experience, and interacting with a demon or whatever it is, they grab them by the hand and they say, we're here, go towards it, don't back off, go towards it. If you go towards it, it will turn. And in the lucid dream experience, the stuff they were doing at Stanford University with Stephen LaBerge talks about this, that when you are in an experience, a very evil type experience, say in a lucid dream or an ayahuasca experience, what you do is you go up to this evil demon, whatever it is, you give it a big hug and a big kiss and treat it with unconditional love, and it will turn into a positive being and give you a message. And that is like the whole thing of life, is that you believe. People say there's a demon. Even Michael Newton told the story. He's regressing this one guy, and this guy's a real preacher who's preaching fire and damnation and stuff. And he's there and he's doing this regression, and all of a sudden the guy says, Satan's in the room. And Newton goes, what? Satan's in here? He's here. I don't see him. He said, he's standing there. He's standing there right in front of him. Don't you see him? And Newton goes, no, I don't see him. He said, yeah, it was describing. He describes him in red, and it's the classical version of whatever. And he says, what? So what's he got on his feet? And then the guy goes, he's got tennis shoes. He goes, he's got tennis shoes on. Take a closer look. He says, look closer.
Yeah.
Who is it really? And then the guy goes, oh, that's my spirit guide. He's playing a joke with me because I'm preaching fire and damnation, and he's coming to teach me a lesson. And you see this kind of stuff where you realize, like, maybe that's what it's about. It's this, you really can manifest stuff. And when you see the lucid dream thing, it's almost like that. People in the lucid dream state, and I've worked for years to try to do, I can't do lucid dream, but in the lucid dream state, they say this is more real than the real world. They all say the same thing. It's more real. This is the dream world we're in. And we hear these people go, I don't really understand it, but they're saying this kind of stuff. And when you're there, you can actually change stuff. So you can change the characters. In fact, they say you can actually yell out a question and you will get an answer. It may be you're put into a situation where you're in a room where things are happening and you're trying to figure out why it is, but you will get an answer to everything. And that's almost like talking to higher self, higher consciousness, to God, to the thing. And you realize that's how it works, that you are in this you can manifest anything, but when you're in the physical state, you don't believe you can. You believe you're separate. You believe it's all random. You believe all this kind of stuff. And it's your beliefs that are holding you back from the real world. The real world is out there. And that's why I'm so excited by the whole thing. I'll tell you an experiment I'm going to run. And I cannot, maybe somebody here knows. There's an experiment done with Jay-Z Knight, who is the big channeler.
Yep.
And this was done in 2015. And she did a test because she's always under attack. It's all garbage. She's making this stuff up or whatever. So she did a bunch of tests on, her brain patterns and stuff. She ran a test where they do her DNA. So they do her DNA when she's ordinary. And then when she's channeling, they do the DNA. When she's ordinary, the DNA shows that she's from France. Shows the whole DNA. When she's channeling Ramtha, she's Icelandic. The DNA is absolutely completely different.
Amazing.
Wow. And then you start looking at this thing
That's
where
amazing.
she says the mind is the DNA. If that's true, it's unbelievable that your DNA, you are actually, and you can actually change your DNA from right now. If you can do, and what you need is this whole thing about disassociation. So I'm looking, and I've got some people who are in this situation. They don't want to give up their DNA. There's all these questions like, this sounds crazy. But if you get one of two things, you get what's called a complete dissociated trance channeler. So you have different types of channelers. So you may be a channeler where you're talking to an alien. It's called a relay channeler. So you talk to the alien gives you a message, you tell this person, and you go back and forth. You're a relay channeler. You're not, no, I'm looking for it. That's what's called in the multiple personality world, co-conscious. So you're like Bashar will describe. What you're looking for is someone like Bashar, where he says, I'm sitting in the front seat of the car, and all of a sudden Bashar gets in, and I have to sit in the passenger seat, and I know something's going on. I really don't want, and you're completely out of it. Or the multiple personality people will say, it's like, one day I'm one person, and all of a sudden, boom, somebody hits you on the head. And then 3 days later, you are back in the passenger seat or driving again, but you're in a different city. And you go, where was I? And that's that amnesia. That's complete dissociation. And what I wanted to test, and all it takes is one more person. I've got one white crow now. There's been one test. I want to verify the Jay-Z Knight test. I want to get a completely dissociated trance channeler who's talking to a gray, whoever they're talking to, where the gray takes over. It's like a possession thing, where the body is controlled, like Bashar or like Jay-Z Knight, where the entity takes control of the body, the voice, all this kind of stuff, or like a multiple personality, where the person will actually change. Their eye color will change. Their handwriting will change. They'll be right with the left instead of the right hand. They speak a foreign language they never spoke before, this kind of stuff. When you get this complete, absolute dissociation, I maintain that when you take the DNA, it's going to be different. The whole world will change if that's true. I can't get a trans channeler who will agree to do this DNA thing, is to actually channel. And there are lots of channelers who will say, "Oh, I can channel." I go, "No, I don't really want a channeler. I want a completely dissociated trans channeler who is not there, where there's another voice, where that the being or the spirit or whatever is talking through that person." And I want to run the test. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm working on now that I think will just. And I'm trying to talk to people. I said, this is like Nobel Prize. I mean, if this is true, the whole world changes. You can actually say that your DNA is your mind, that you can, and that's the whole thing behind DNA.
Right. You
have this whole experiment where your mind, you can change your DNA, you can change your brain structure, all this kind of stuff. And that you control. And when you start to realize that thing, that your mind is running the show, and you can better yourself, you can, all this sort of stuff, if you learn how to do it. If we can move the world to that point where they realize this is actually true.
Amazing.
Because right now it's just an anecdotal thing. You're telling the story, I think, this, whatever, but this is on paper. This is actual verified on paper DNA that shows that when your mind changes, when you dissociate, your DNA will change. And because most science will say, no, I can't have it. No.
I mean, that takes epigenetics. We just said the same thing. I was going to say that takes epigenetics to an art form, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's the whole thing. So we now believe we've moved. So we are moving on the scientific world, the same as in the spiritual world. We're moving to the point where we realize you're not, even though some people will still say you're a victim of your genes. And now we know that you're not. You can modify your epigenetics, your markers and stuff like that, just by the way you. I even have on my email, I do the thing. Most people don't really realize this kind of stuff. I say, for example, like a honeybee, like a bee, a worker bee, and a queen are genetically identical, absolutely identical. The only difference between them is when a queen dies in a hive, they start feeding a young bee pure royal jelly. And then it turns into a queen. So it's the epigenetic. There's 14 markers that change inside, and it becomes a queen. Whereas when they're feeding the other young bees, they're feeding them royal jelly and pollen and one other thing. And it shrinks their ovaries so they don't become a queen. And so the question is, what came first? You need the queen to get the worker. You need the worker to make to get the royal jelly, and you need the worker to get the queen. So which came first? And you see these egg things where it's not a random event. It can't be a random event. It has to be a world organized. There's some organization, there's some mind behind that does it, because all of them, you can't have one without the other. And there's 3 different things you need. And then who's got the formula for the royal jelly? Who came up with that? It's this, you start looking at that kind of stuff, or the thing with the caterpillar and the butterfly are identically same genes, exactly the same. And yet one is completely different than the other. And it comes to this, we now realize you can change the genes through whatever process of chemicals or whatever. And this is one step farther. It's like this whole thing where you go like, wow, I mean, if you can actually change your DNA completely to a different nationality, then people have to, and I just want to do I want to do the cheap test. I said, I don't really need to do expensive DNA. I just got to sort of stick it in there and people will go, that guy's crazy. I'm going to do the test again. And the guys with the money in the labs will say, I'm going to prove this wrong. And if somebody can verify the test, I mean, then I say, I have this expression. I say, if this turns out to be true, we are no longer in Kansas.
Exactly.
We are
very much so. Absolutely.
So I actually know some people who trans channel completely. So I'm definitely going to get in touch with them. But the implications of what you're saying are phenomenal, because if we really wrap our brains around the fact that we can change ourselves, we can change our life, we can change every single thing because we can change our DNA, the whole world is going to be doing something different.
The important thing is to realize that we are out there. We are not in here. I always make this joke now. I said, we think we're inside our head because of our eyes and our ears. It's a good thing it's not on our rear end, because then you'd suddenly think you're living, you know where. I mean, that's this idea. We have this illusion that we're in our heads. And I say to people, do you really actually think there's a screen inside your head with little speakers or whatever?
Yeah.
And it's this idea, like, you know, the real heavy spiritualist people will say, where is the image? Where is it happening? When you start looking at that, you go, that's kind of weird. And if you realize you're outside your head, that you are controlling, almost like the idea that you think that you're aware in your head, but if you put your hand there and I hit your thumb with a hammer, the awareness is in your thumb. It's not in your head. Seriously. And your whole body is aware, and we don't realize, we make these mistakes. We don't realize that our consciousness is probably outside of our body, that the brain is just the idiot in between that's doing all the work. You tell, I must have a muse. I don't know if you've ever done the muse thing with the meditation thing. I don't own very much. It's one thing I own. I own a muse. And I have this muse thing, and this is this thing where you do the meditation thing, where it will give you noise of rain when you're off, when your brain pattern is off. When you still your mind, you hear little birds. And so you sit there, and then you realize, I'm doing it. I'm not my brain, because you're sitting there, and I get worse at it. I had one a couple days ago where I was out of the zone 8 times. I couldn't believe it. I'd go do 51s and never go out of the zone. I was out of the zone 8 times. I only had 7 birds. I've had 145 birds in 10 minutes. Wow. So you're either on, and then you think, oh, this is easy. I got it. 145 birds. I know how to do this now. And you're watching your breath. And all of a sudden it's like, and then the rain comes and you go, okay, slow down. And you realize you're doing it. You're telling your brain, slow down. Okay. And then all of a sudden it gets worse and gets worse. And you go, and you're trying, and you realize it's somebody out there. It's not your brain doing this. It's you. And so I say, everybody needs a muse. And then you realize, no, the I is not in the head. It's someplace else, and it's giving instructions to the brain, but it's not in the brain, because people think, and they'll use this all the time to say, oh, it's the brain. And I go, no, it's not the brain.
No, it's not the brain.
It's not the brain. There's somebody telling the brain what to do. The brain is not a random. We got to believe this idea that it's just random. It's all just random. It just accidentally happened. The DNA just sort of formed. You know, somebody was rolling for 13 trillion years or billion years. Somebody's rolling double sixes, and this all happened. And it's like, you really believe that? It's like, wow. It's like, you know, that kind of stuff. When you start to understand the consciousness is out there, and that you can move your consciousness to another place. If your brain pattern stops, your consciousness continues. The thing is to get a verification. And that's why this DNA experiment is so important. That if either JZ Knight made this thing up, and she went to 3 different labs, either she made this up, or this is the most revolutionary thing ever, because it actually shows, no, the mind is controlling the physical, because the DNA is the whole physical structure. So if the mind is controlling it, and if you can change it from one moment to another and back and forth, and you can keep doing the DNA test, to me, it's revolutionary stuff.
That's amazing.
I was going to ask you what your next puzzle was going to be, and you went right into that whole thing. So that is your latest challenge. What else is coming up for you? What else do you feel yourself moving towards?
Well, I can give you a couple. I just sort of, I walk an awful lot, and I just sort of let happen what happens. So I have that. That's my main thing. When I saw this, and I sort of got the aha moment, I went, oh my God, I could do this. And I saw the last month, that's all I've done. I'm trying to figure out, how can I talk to someone with multiple personality? You can't talk to them because they've been abused, and it's the same thing with abuse. If you take multiple personality people who completely dissociate and turn into these other people, it's the same thing with mediums. Most people don't know that mediums, vast majority of mediums, there's a study done in Brazil where it was like 80% or something had childhood abuse issues. And it's the same thing. You're trying to shut out the world, and so you either split into these multiple personalities, or you split and suddenly you're talking to your dead grandma. So I was working on that. But the other thing I had, and the disclosure thing, I always get dragged back in. I just hate it, because it's looking out there and thinking the government's going to answer your questions and stuff.
It's not.
But I got dragged back in because of Tom DeLonge coming up. And I was involved in the 70s with this issue, in the 80s with this issue. And when Tom DeLonge came forward, I went, oh my God, they're doing the same thing. They're doing it again. It's like the government is leaking this material, but it's a slow disclosure. So they leak material, they put disinformation around it so you can't confirm it. So I did the Tom DeLonge thing, and I thought, oh, I'm out. I'm not going to do this anymore or whatever. And so I wrote up the latest Tom DeLonge stuff, because my book called Managing Magic, I wrote before Tom DeLonge came public. And I talked about Tom DeLonge.
What is it called, Grant? I'm sorry.
It's called Managing Magic.
Managing magic.
Actually, the CIA started to use that. The head guy at the CIA started to use that. That I call it magic. It's not UFOs, it's magic. Because at the CIA, it's called phenomenology. It's called the phenomenology desk. In 1991, Ron Pandolfi, who's apparently the top scientist at the CIA, went to a guy by the name of Dan Smith, and he said, "We have a phenomenology problem. It's all the same thing. Ghosts, near-death experience, UFOs, angels. It's all the same. It's phenomenology. It's this sort of dissociation." So I got out of it, and then I'm following the thing again, and then someone dropped me a document, and I've been talking to some people on the inside, and I said, I've spent my whole life, and I said, we want disclosure. We want disclosure. This document will be very revolutionary, but I will probably be ostracized by most people in the UFO community because I'm going to out a bunch of people. And I got this. I can't see where I got it from. It was the most dramatic thing I'd ever seen in my life, and it was like, wow. And I'm talking to the guy, and I said, "You can't sit on this thing. You got to do some of this." And then I said, "I'll do another Managing Magic book. I call it Beyond Managing Magic, and I'll just put it in the book." And so then when I saw the actual document, and I'm going, oh my goodness, like nobody will ever talk to me again. But I figured I've spent my whole life doing this, and I said, we need disclosure. And then suddenly I've got it. And the question would be, if you had the document, would you cover up or would you disclose? And that's what I think to myself. I got to release the document. I have no choice. It's not a government document. It's a sort of a notes, transcripts, stuff like this. And I'm thinking, I can't do this. So I've spent the last couple of weeks, people keep asking me, what are you going to do? They sort of know that I'm going to get a confirmation of crash flying saucers. There's going to be a confirmation of MJ12, the control group, and stuff like this. And yet it's like pretty scary whether I take some of the names out or what I do. So that's my other thing. I'm trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do with this document? Like, what do I pull out of the UFO community? Do I, take it, because it's basically what I waited for my entire life. And then someone handed it to me. In fact, I saw it in Laughlin a couple months ago, and I really wasn't going to look at it. The guy showed it to me, and he said, "I need you to look at this. I need to talk to you." And I looked, and I went, "Oh, where'd you get it?" And he told me where he got it from, and it was a very legitimate place where he got it from. And then I'm thinking, wow. And I looked at it, and then I said, "Well, give me a copy." And he said, "Oh, I don't want to give you a copy." And I go, "Well, they know you got it. I mean, whoever, they know you got it. I mean, what are you going to do? Sit on this thing?" And now I'm in the same situation as I'm thinking to myself, am I going to sit on this thing or am I going to release it? So that may be something I think you'll hear about it if I do make this sort of release. But I want to get out of the UFO community in terms of the disclosure stuff, the sighting stuff. I basically want to still spend time with experiencers. And the more I look at the consciousness thing, the more I realize this is where all the answers are. And that's what the aliens, whoever they are doing, is they are not talking to the government. They're talking to people, and they're talking about these issues of how does the world work, love, oneness, all this kind of stuff. That's what it's coming down to. The more I move, and I feel good when I'm in that place. It's like, then I really think I'm helping the world. I'm actually putting a message out that actually works. Whereas I'm talking about the government, and it's like the evil government and all this kind of stuff, and it's still just a card you're being played. It's more important for people to realize that they are an individual that controls their life, and they're going someplace, and you came from somewhere, and the life has meaning and all this kind of stuff. That's more important to me.
It's so important.
It's that look back attitude where you're looking back from eternity.
Yeah. It's almost like you remember where you were. Like, is the idea is that when you're dead, you understand everything. You have to go back to the river of forgetfulness. So when you go back, or you're there, you realize what it's all about, and then you have to deal with that, and you see the world completely different. You react completely differently.
Amazing. How can people find you, Grant? What's your website or your newest book? Or
actually, I'm actually going to be taking my website down, I think.
no.
Well, there was problems with it. It's the old idea. I'm not a technical person, and there was lots of problems with it. And most of what I had, like the presidential website with all the stories of the presidents, it all sort of got lost. I can recover the documents. And so what I may do is put it on a blog site. But again, it's where you're at. I have so many things going on that I go, yeah, I can wait for that. So I'll do it some other time. It's not that important. It's more important, this DNA thing and this kind of stuff where I'm going. So they can go there. On Amazon, I have about 6 books. The ones I would recommend are the inspired, a book called Inspired, the Paranormal World of Creativity, where I go through this really bizarre sort of people who get instantaneous songs. How many people, 150 songs in dreams. How many books came in dreams? How many books were downloaded where people got the entire book, where they just sat down at a typewriter and just typed the book out.
Right.
These weird sort of stories, savants and all these kind of bizarre stories. That what I would sort of recommend. And I did one on music, which is a story that I got where somebody phoned me up, Chris Bledsoe, I don't know if you know who he is, but he phoned me up and I had a direct, very dramatic experience with him at his house. And he's a big experiencer in North Carolina. And he phoned me up and he said, I got a message for you from the Guardians. And I go, oh, really? Got a message for me from them? He said, yeah, the message is in the music. And I go, Chris, you could be talking to, maybe they're talking to the wrong guy. Chris, I don't listen to music. I don't play music. I don't care about music. I'm a radio talk guy. I have no interest in music, whatever. And he said, oh, well, what you should do, and this is a synchronicity thing. He says, oh, well, you should listen to Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. And I go, whatever. And still haven't listened to the song. It's like,
Well, his whole family, wasn't it his whole family? He had several family members. They've all been a part of a big experience, all of them, hasn't it? I believe.
Who's that?
Chris Bledsoe?
Oh, yeah. Well, his family eventually all saw something. I know his wife was dead set against it because it was a very religious family. His wife, very religious. I remember him telling me the story where she saw these shadow figures and he didn't realize she'd seen them. And he was being investigated. MUFON was there doing the investigation and she's in the interview and she says, oh, these shadow figures are going around. And then he goes to her, he goes, what? You saw the shadow figures? And she goes, yeah, I've seen them. And he goes, Yvonne, I've been praying for a year for you to see something. And she said, let me tell you what, Chris, don't ever pray for me again.
Especially in North Carolina, yeah.
So I wrote this book and because it dragged me down the rabbit hole. I mean, this is the thing where you let yourself go. And then he said, listen to Kashmir and Led Zeppelin. I go, whatever. And he said, the other song you should listen to is Neil Young, After the Gold Rush. And I went, Neil Young? Are you kidding me? Neil Young? Neil Young's part of this thing? And he goes, yeah, Neil Young's part of this. And I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, which the joke is even people in Canada don't want to visit Winnipeg. I mean, it's like nobody wants to come here. And yet Neil Young grew up in Winnipeg. So when he said, Neil Young, I said, Neil Young grew up in my city. Mm-hmm. Well, what's the song called again? And it's called After the Gold Rush. And if you look at the lyrics, I'm in a bombed out basement and the silver seeds are coming and they're taking the chosen ones and they're moving them to another planet. And when I saw the lyrics, I go, oh my goodness. And I started a book called Tuned In, the Paranormal World of Music. And I look at all the bizarre paranormal stuff that happens around musicians because they're all right brained. They're able to dissociate, right brain people. And a lot of them are experiencers. You got Cat Stevens, you got John Lennon, you got Patti Smith, you got all these people that clearly have been abducted. The Moody Blues, a band out of Canada, an entire band. So you see this kind of thing. And so I did that book, which was fascinating to me, this connection of UFOs to musicians. And then I got a second one. I have another book that I'm working on, but again, I have so many things happening that I don't know if I'll ever finish this book. And it's on Mission Ram, which is a whole new story. But that was one where my Charlie Red Star story got optioned for a movie. And the woman wanted to do a movie on Mission Rama, which is a group out of Peru. It starts in 1974, where they're doing this automatic writing and they're talking to aliens and stuff. And the aliens start to appear at a certain time in a certain place. And these people are able to get messages from the aliens. It's a long sort of story. And so she wants to do this movie and they want to finance it in Canada. They can't get it financed in Canada. So she says, what we're going to do is we're going to take your story and we'll have you in Carmen and it'll be a private investigator. And he's doing this investigation, or a reporter. And then all of a sudden he's going to discover Mission Ram and he's going to fly to Peru and they'll finance the movie then. So I said, whatever, pay your money, whatever for your option. I don't really care what you do. You want to read the script? No, don't really read the script. And then I'm going to, I had a friend who's a legal secretary in Los Angeles and she's a Latino. And she says to me, she does editing for some of my book stuff. And she says, oh, you need to come to Mount Shasta. We go up on the mountain, all these people from all over the world, Latino people, and we meditate for world peace. And I go, Katerina, I don't know if I really want to do that. And she keeps going. She's helped me out. So I go, okay, Katerina, I have nothing against world peace. I have nothing against meditation. But I'll drive 3 days to California and I'll sit on a mountain and we'll meditate for world peace. So I go there and I'm going across the Nevada desert. and there's a girl with me, and her cell phone rings, and the cell phone on the cell phone it's Katerina on the phone. It's just, I got a message from Grant from Aunt Terrell, and Aunt Terrell is this being from 1974, this alien. So now I got another message from an alien, and I already knew what happened with Chris Bledsoe turned into a book. So I said to this desk, I said, get the message. What exactly is he saying? Get exactly what is the message? And so she's trying to get this exact wording of what the message was. And it was basically, they know Grant's coming to the mountain. Aunt Terrell, the alien, knows Grant's coming to the mountain, and there's going to be a program sighting on Saturday night, and I should tell everybody. So I put on my Facebook, I go there, and this thing happens. And they have these what are called antennas who are able to actually predict to the minute. So they predict 9:33. Two of them predict 9:33. 9:33, this thing starts over my head, this flashing thing over my head. And I'm just hooked into this. I wrote a book. I started the book, and then I got down another rabbit hole. So I haven't finished the book. It's about 3/4 done. This book of this Mission Rama, which I thought was the most interesting story I had ever seen, of these people who are going to actually, open Zendras, where people go into these Zendras and there's an alien in there and they're on another planet. They walk in through the Zendra, like we call them portals, walk in and they're on another planet. It's just the most bizarre story because it's a Spanish story. It's in Spanish, but it's not in the English language. Nobody knows about this group and all these Zendras that have been open around the world. And I thought, this is fantastic. So I have all these different projects, but I would say if they go to my Facebook site, presidentialufo.com, most of the new stuff I put up is there. And if they're going to go to Amazon, the book I would recommend is this Inspired book, which I think goes to what we're talking about today. It's more than aliens. It's more than, free energy. It's all about this weird idea of understanding what consciousness is.
Beautiful. Definitely.
I think for many people, especially Joe Blow and Harry Hohandle out there that really don't know a lot, for them to start wrapping their head around the oneness, that is really difficult. Yeah. Now, in my download, I was given an analogy, and maybe ask you about this, because I was shown that we are one, but if you compare it to a forest, in a tree in a forest, and that tree spreads itself under the surface of the ground by the root system, and then it pokes up new trees next to it.
Yeah.
So it looks like it's 7 or 8 trees standing in this field, but under the ground, they are all part of the same organism.
Oh. Yeah. There's actually...
both me and Tom and Nori here, we are one above, we are one under the ground, so spiritually, but above the ground, we look like individual people.
Yeah. Yeah. And we make the mistake. There's actually a woman, and unfortunately, I don't have her name in my head. There's a woman who did research in Canada, in BC, which is where all the forests are. And she actually does exactly what you're talking about. She goes and they investigate. What she does is she takes a radioactive element. She puts a bag around a tree. She puts this radioactive element in there, and then she sees where does it show up, and it shows up in all these trees all around because it's going in. And she said there's I can't remember, there's 100 miles of root system under every foot you step under. It's a massive thing. And she actually goes, and you have to, I'll send a link to one of you to show you what this link is, because it's amazing when you watch her videos. She actually talks about the fact that in a forest, they all work as one. You think these trees are competing. That's our thing. And what you see is that the trees that are in shade are given more carbon. They're sending more carbon to these trees. And all this stuff is happening, that the trees of different species are helping each other. And she's proved this through this underground system of all these things that almost, her expression is basically the whole forest is under the ground. It's not above the ground. That when you see it, and what we do is we go down and we cut down what they call the mother tree, the tree that's actually sort of in charge. They actually have trees that are in charge of these trees. And it's just bizarre. It's almost like the thing with where it's a self-regulating universe, almost like the cells in the human body, where I use the expression where a cell, you say, it's just a cell. We use naming theory to make things go away. You say, it's just a cell. It's just dividing. And I said, you got to realize what's going on here. You have a cell that has 100 trillion atoms in it. And that cell will duplicate itself. It will source. It's got to find 100 trillion atoms. Then it'll gather all those atoms together. It'll put them in the right 3-dimensional position in time and space, and it'll give them life. And it does it in 16 hours. And you say, just duplicate it. Yeah, you try it. You try. We can't get the first 10 atoms to go together. And it's doing this. So you see that cells, everything in the universe has this like almost the idea where if you take back all the cells, if you divide. If you go back through evolution, you come down to one cell. It'll all go back to one cell. That one cell had all the information for everything that's ever been on the earth. It all goes back. If you keep dividing it back and you start looking at that, or an acorn, that it has the knowledge to build this entire tree and then duplicate it. And like the cell duplicates itself, and then that duplicates itself. And then there's 200 different cells in the body, and it'll make 100 trillion cells, and they're all doing the things that they're supposed to do. And that came from this one little cell.
And dirt and water.
Yeah, it's just incredible when you start looking, because people just sort of assume, oh, it's just this, just that. And when you start looking at the complexity of different things, in 1800s, you say, you know, if you're Darwin, you say, oh, it's just a cell. But when you start to realize what's actually going on, or even an atom, people say, oh, it just happened. And I go, like the helium atom, you take a look at the helium atom with your electron and proton and your subatomic particles and stuff. And now there's a theory that's come from this, her name is Kay Mandel Ray. She's being used by Kit Green and Gary Nolan on this project. And she says that the material comes from these, what she calls gravitons, coming out of the fourth dimension. She's an intuitive, that these government people are using this intuitive. Wow. And they say she's 95% accurate. And so you see this thing with thousands of these gravitons coming to make the subatomic particles and what, this all happened by accident? You can see it's self-organizing, that this is all happening. This is not happening by accident. You can say we're developed through random mutation or through survival of the fittest. What do you say about an atom? How many mutations does it take for an atom to be together? And if you threw the dice for a billion times or whatever and made an atom, then it's a random world. That means it's random. That means in order to have that atom again, it doesn't just stay around. You got to roll the dice to make it happen again. It's like saying that once you make an atom, once you roll a billion double sixes, then every casino in the world starts rolling double sixes. No. You got to keep rolling the double. It's still random. It's all random. It's like you and I. If this is a random event, we didn't choose to be here. This is the idea we're supposed to believe. That it was just a random event, that we didn't choose to have an interview today. Somebody started rolling the dice 13.7 billion years, and it's just happened. And it's like, you know, like give your head a shake. I mean,
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's an
This
interesting world when you start looking at it.
So much fun. So much fun, Grant. Thank you so much for being here. Oh my goodness.
Thanks for having me, and hopefully you can get me a trans channel. I'll actually
do my best.
I have a proposal that describes exactly what I'm looking for. It's very, very specific, but it's revolutionary if it does work. In terms of, I'd be very excited by that. You might actually turn the world around if you have what I'm looking for. I'll send you the proposal. And we'll go from there.
All right, sounds great.
Channels too. Maybe send us your criteria for what you're looking for, and then we can.
We'll post it right on the video on YouTube so that it's right there with the video. Anybody's got any question? Here's what Grant's looking for.
Right.
Yeah, like
and in the meantime, if you are a trans channel, easy for you to say.
Yeah.
What did she say? my program has a glitch in it. If you are a trans channel and you want to get in touch with us before we get all of the production done, you can email us at broadcastteamalpha.com.
Yeah,
just
beautiful.
Click on the contact, and we'll get you over to Grant. Absolutely.
Yeah, we've got a contact page on the website. People can get a hold of us there. It's as easy as broadcastteamalpha@gmail.com. We're on Facebook, so yeah, any of those channels will.
But on our website we have the contact page, so that's super easy. Yeah, and join our join our web. Join our YouTube channel.
Subscribe.
I think my blood sugar is low. Wow. Subscribe. Well, thank you, Tom.
I'll be forever indebted.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grant, for coming on board today.
Thank you.
We're going to end the show, but stick around after we shut down the show. We've got a couple more things maybe we want to ask you. So with that being said, we're going to hit the outbound here, the goodbye note here, and thank everybody. The chat room, we had a few people there. Thank you all for listening. This was great. Thanks again, Grant, for being on today. And in fact, this is going to be out once it's done processing. It'll be out on YouTube, and you can listen to it right away. So without further ado, we'll see you all next time.
Bye.